The Silent Language of Minds. Part 1. The Awakening of Human Insight. There is a language older than words, a language that speaks through the smallest movement of the eyes, through the tension of the lips, through the subtle shift of a shoulder. Long before humans mastered speech, they mastered signals. Our ancestors survived not because they spoke better, but because they observed better. This ancient skill is what we call physiognomy and behavioral reading. But modern science has transformed this ancient intuition into something deeper, something more powerful. It is the art of reading the human mind without entering it. The truth is simple, yet rarely understood. Every human being is constantly revealing themselves, not through what they say, but through what they cannot control. Micro-movements, instinctive reactions, the silent dialogue between emotion and the body. The trained observer can detect hesitation in half a second, fear in the blink of an eye, confidence in the rhythm of breathing. Most people live their entire lives blind to this silent language. But once you learn to see it, you will never look at people the same way again. You will notice how someone avoids eye contact when hiding information, how a confident speaker controls pauses in conversation, how discomfort appears as subtle body contractions. Reading people is not magic. It is attention sharpened into a weapon. And the first rule of mastering this skill is simple. Observe before you interpret. Many beginners make a fatal mistake. They rush to conclusions. A crossed arm does not always mean defensiveness. A smile does not always mean happiness. Human behavior must be read in patterns, not in isolated gestures. A single signal is noise, but a cluster of signals, that is a message. When someone avoids eye contact, touches their face repeatedly, and changes their tone of voice, you are no longer looking at coincidence. You are looking at leakage. Psychologists call this phenomenon emotional leakage. It happens because the brain cannot perfectly hide emotion. The conscious mind may try to lie, but the subconscious always leaves traces. And those traces escape through the body, through breathing, through posture, through timing. Think of the human body as a broadcast system. Every emotion sends signals. Most people are terrible receivers, but the trained reader of behavior becomes something else entirely. A human radar. You begin to detect shifts in energy before words are spoken. You feel when someone is uncomfortable. You sense when someone is lying. You recognize when someone is trying to control the conversation. And this ability gives you something extremely rare in social interactions: psychological advantage. But before you can read others, you must master something even more important: control of your own signals. Because the same rules apply to you. Just as you can read others, others can read you. Your confidence is visible. Your fear is visible. Your intentions are visible. That is why masters of communication do two things at the same time. They observe others while managing their own presence. This dual awareness is what separates amateurs from experts. In the chapters ahead, you will learn how to detect hidden emotions, how to recognize signs of deception, how to control the rhythm of conversation, how to guide dialogue without appearing dominant, and most importantly, how to develop the rare ability to see what others miss. Because the greatest power in human interaction is not persuasion. It is perception. When you truly understand people, influence becomes effortless. And this journey begins with a simple question. Are you truly seeing the people around you, Or are you only hearing their words? Welcome to the study of the silent language of minds. Your training begins now. Part 2. The eyes never lie. If the human body were a book, the eyes would be its most revealing chapter. Across cultures, languages, and centuries, one truth remains constant. The eyes betray what the mind tries to hide. When people attempt to control their words, their faces often become disciplined. They rehearse smiles. They regulate tone. They carefully choose sentences. But the eyes are far more difficult to command. Why? Because the eyes are directly connected to emotional processing inside the brain, particularly within the limbic system, the ancient structure responsible for instinct, fear, attraction, and threat detection. This means something fascinating. Before a person consciously decides how to behave, their eyes have already reacted. A fraction of a second, that is all it takes. And within that fraction lies a powerful clue. Experts in behavioral observation pay attention to 3 key elements of eye behavior: direction, duration, and dilation. Each one tells a story. First, direction of gaze. Where someone looks during conversation reveals where their attention truly lives. When a person maintains comfortable eye contact, it usually indicates engagement and confidence. But when the gaze repeatedly drifts away at key moments, especially when answering important questions, the mind may be searching for something. Sometimes it searches for memory. Other times it searches for an excuse. But avoidance is rarely random. Pay attention to the timing. If someone looks away before answering, they may be constructing a response. If they look away after answering, they may be checking your reaction. This difference may seem small, but it changes the entire meaning of the moment. Second, duration of eye contact. Too little eye contact can signal discomfort, insecurity, or concealment. But surprisingly, too much eye contact can also be suspicious. People who are consciously trying to appear honest sometimes overcompensate. They stare longer than natural, attempting to convince you of their sincerity. True comfort in conversation creates a rhythm. Eye contact flows naturally, appearing, breaking, returning again. It is never rigid. Third, pupil dilation. This is one of the most fascinating signals the human body produces. Pupils expand automatically when a person experiences strong emotion, interest, excitement, curiosity, attraction, even fear. The person has no conscious control over this reaction. It is purely biological. For centuries, skilled negotiators and interrogators have quietly observed this phenomenon. Because when someone hears information that deeply affects them, the pupils often respond instantly. It is the body's silent confession. Of course, no single signal proves anything. Remember the first rule: behavior must be read in clusters. If someone briefly looks away, it means nothing. But if the same person avoids eye contact, touches their face repeatedly, shifts posture, and changes speaking speed, then the body is no longer whispering. It is speaking loudly. This is what trained observers learn to detect: patterns, consistency, timing. Another subtle eye signal appears during emotional discomfort. It is called the blink rate shift. Under normal conditions, humans blink about 15 to 20 times per minute. But during stress, anxiety, or deception, this rhythm often changes dramatically. Some people blink rapidly. Others freeze their blinking entirely. Both reactions occur because the brain is under pressure. The mind is working harder, and the body reveals it. But perhaps the most powerful observation skill of all is not what you see in the eyes. It is when the eyes change. Moments of surprise, moments of fear, moments of internal conflict. These emotions appear in flashes so brief that most people never notice them. A micro-expression may last only 1/5 of a second, yet within that instant, the truth appears and disappears, like lightning behind clouds. To most observers, it is invisible, but to a trained reader of human behavior, it is a signal brighter than words. In the next chapter, we will explore one of the most powerful and controversial skills in behavioral psychology: detecting deception. You will learn why most people misunderstand lying, why traditional signs of dishonesty are often wrong, and how the human body leaks truth even when the mind tries to conceal it. Because deception has a cost, and the body always pays the price. The question is only this: will you learn to see it? Part 3. The hidden signs of deception. Lying is one of the most complex behaviors the human brain can perform. To lie successfully, the mind must do several things at once. It must hide the truth. It must invent a believable alternative. It must remember the story it created. And at the same time, it must monitor the reaction of the listener. All of this happens within seconds. This intense mental activity places enormous pressure on the brain. And when the brain is under pressure, the body begins to leak signals. This is why deception is rarely perfect. The human body is simply not designed to lie comfortably. One of the first clues appears in what psychologists call cognitive load. When a person tells the truth, they are recalling something that already exists in memory. The brain simply retrieves information. But when someone lies, they must construct reality in real time. This requires far more mental effort. Because of this, liars often show subtle delays in their responses. A question is asked. There is a pause, then comes the answer. That pause is not always suspicious on its own. But when the delay appears specifically during sensitive questions, the mind may be working harder than usual. Another fascinating signal involves speech patterns. Truthful speech tends to be natural and fluid. It follows a relaxed rhythm. But deception often disrupts this rhythm. A liar may begin speaking faster than normal, as if rushing to escape the situation. Or they may slow down, carefully choosing every word. Sometimes sentences become overly complex. Sometimes they become unusually simple. Both extremes can appear when the mind is trying to maintain control. But perhaps the most famous signal of deception is self-touch behavior. When humans experience stress, the nervous system activates what scientists call self-soothing gestures. These are small movements that help calm the body. Touching the neck, rubbing the hands, adjusting clothing repeatedly, touching the face. These gestures do not prove deception. Stress can appear in many situations. But when these signals appear precisely when difficult questions arise, they become meaningful. The body is trying to reduce internal tension, and tension often appears when someone fears being discovered. Another powerful signal involves the feet. Most people watch the face during conversation, but experienced observers often watch something else entirely: the feet. Why? Because the feet are the most honest part of the body. While people consciously control facial expressions, they rarely think about their feet. Under stress, the feet often reveal the desire to escape. They may point toward an exit. They may begin shifting restlessly. They may repeatedly reposition on the floor. These movements often reflect the brain's instinctive reaction: flight. Even when a person remains seated, the body sometimes prepares for departure. Another subtle clue appears in emotional timing. Real emotions happen instantly. When something funny occurs, laughter appears immediately. When something shocking happens, surprise appears instantly. But when someone is acting, emotion sometimes arrives too late. For example, imagine someone tells a story that should be amusing. They finish the sentence, and only after a moment do they begin to laugh. The mind is trying to remember, I should laugh here. This delay can expose the difference between genuine emotion and manufactured reaction. But the most important principle in detecting deception is this: no single signal proves a lie. Human behavior is complex. People touch their faces for many reasons. People pause before speaking for many reasons. What matters is pattern disruption. Every person has a natural baseline of behavior: their normal speaking speed, their typical gestures, their natural posture. When deception appears, that baseline often changes. The rhythm shifts, the body tightens, the voice alters, and the trained observer notices the difference. The true art of behavioral reading is not hunting for lies. It is noticing change. Change in tone, change in movement, change in emotional flow. When multiple changes appear at the same moment, something important is happening inside the mind. Perhaps it is fear. Perhaps it is embarrassment. Perhaps it is deception. Your role is not to judge immediately. Your role is to observe carefully, because the next skill you will learn may be even more powerful than detecting lies. In the next chapter, we will explore how skilled communicators control the direction of conversation without appearing controlling. You will discover how certain people guide discussions effortlessly, how they influence attention, how they lead dialogue, and how the most powerful speakers rarely dominate conversations. They shape them quietly. Because the true master of human interaction does not fight for control. They make control feel natural. Part 4. The art of controlling the conversation. Most people believe that the person who talks the most controls the conversation. This belief is completely wrong. In reality, the person who controls the direction of attention controls the conversation. True conversational influence does not come from speaking louder, speaking longer, or speaking more confidently. It comes from something far more subtle. It comes from guiding focus. Imagine a skilled chess player. They do not move pieces randomly. Every move quietly pushes the game toward a desired position. Great communicators do the same thing with dialogue. They guide topics. They guide emotions. They guide the rhythm of discussion. And often, the other person never even notices it happening. The first technique used by masters of conversation is called strategic silence. Most people are uncomfortable with silence. When a pause appears in conversation, they rush to fill it. But silence is one of the most powerful psychological tools. When you ask someone a question and remain silent, something interesting happens. The other person begins to feel pressure. The human brain dislikes unfinished moments. Silence creates a psychological vacuum, and people naturally attempt to fill that vacuum with information. Often, they reveal more than they originally intended. Interrogators, negotiators, and experienced interviewers use this technique constantly. They ask a question, then they wait. No interruption, no additional words, just silence. And slowly, the other person begins to talk. The second technique involves controlled curiosity. People love talking about themselves, their experiences, their opinions, their stories. When someone feels heard and understood, their mental defenses begin to lower. This creates an opening. By asking thoughtful questions, you guide the conversation exactly where you want it to go. Notice how skilled interviewers operate. They rarely dominate the conversation. Instead, they ask questions that quietly lead the discussion deeper. A simple question can unlock an entire story, and within that story, valuable information appears. The third technique is emotional mirroring. Humans naturally trust people who feel familiar. One of the fastest ways to create that familiarity is through subtle mirroring. When two people are comfortable with each other, their body language often begins to synchronize naturally. They adopt similar posture. They speak at similar speeds. They use similar gestures. This phenomenon happens automatically between friends, but skilled communicators know how to create it intentionally. If someone speaks slowly, you slightly slow your pace. If someone uses calm gestures, you soften your own movements. If someone leans forward while speaking, you gradually mirror the posture. This should never be exaggerated or obvious. The goal is not imitation. The goal is subtle harmony. When two people move and speak in similar rhythms, the brain interprets it as connection. Trust begins to grow. And when trust grows, influence becomes easier. Another powerful technique is topic redirection. Sometimes conversations drift toward uncomfortable territory. Other times, the discussion moves away from the subject you want to explore. Rather than rejecting a topic directly, skilled communicators gently guide the conversation somewhere else. For example, instead of saying, "I don't want to talk about that," they might say, "That's interesting. It reminds me of something related." The transition feels natural. The other person follows the new direction without resistance, like a river quietly changing course. The final and perhaps most powerful technique is calm authority. People instinctively respect emotional stability. When someone remains calm, steady, and composed, even during tension, they create a psychological center within the conversation. Others begin to adjust around that stability. This is why great negotiators rarely show frustration. Great leaders rarely appear rushed. Great speakers rarely appear nervous. Their calm presence silently communicates confidence, and confidence attracts attention. In conversation, emotional control is influence. The person who manages their emotional state manages the entire atmosphere of the dialogue. But there is an even deeper layer to human behavior that most people never study. Because beneath every gesture, beneath every expression, beneath every word, there is something even more powerful: intent. In the next chapter, you will learn how to detect the hidden intentions behind human behavior, why people say things they do not mean, why some individuals attempt to dominate interactions, and how to recognize psychological power dynamics the moment they appear. Because once you can see intention, you begin to see the true game behind every conversation. Part 5. Reading hidden intentions. Words are rarely the whole story. In fact, in many conversations, words are the least reliable signal of what a person truly intends. Human beings often say things for social reasons, for politeness, for protection, for manipulation. But beneath every sentence lies something deeper: intent. Intent is the hidden engine behind human behavior. It shapes tone, posture, eye movement, and even the timing of responses. And once you learn to recognize intent, conversations begin to reveal their true structure. You no longer hear only what people say. You begin to see why they are saying it. There are 3 primary intentions that appear in most social interactions: connection, control, protection. Every conversation you observe will usually contain one of these motives, sometimes even all 3. Let us begin with the first, the intention of connection. When a person seeks connection, their behavior becomes open and inviting. Their body posture is relaxed. Their shoulders are rarely tense. Their gestures flow naturally. Eye contact appears comfortable rather than forced. But the most powerful signal of connection is attention. A person who genuinely seeks connection listens carefully. They react to your words. They ask questions that build upon what you have said. Their focus remains on the exchange itself, not on themselves. In these moments, the conversation feels effortless. Time moves quickly, and the interaction creates a sense of psychological safety. Humans naturally enjoy this feeling, which is why people often remember how someone made them feel more than what they actually said. But not every conversation is built on connection. Sometimes the intention is something very different. The intention of control. Control appears when a person attempts to dominate the structure of the interaction. This does not always happen aggressively. In fact, the most skilled controllers rarely appear forceful. Instead, they guide conversations subtly. They interrupt strategically. They change topics quickly when discussions move in uncomfortable directions. They ask questions that place the other person in a defensive position. Control can also appear through status signaling. A person may emphasize their achievements repeatedly. They may correct others frequently. They may speak in long explanations rather than brief exchanges. These behaviors send a quiet message. I hold the dominant position in this interaction. But experienced observers know that true confidence rarely needs to announce itself. When someone works too hard to establish status, it often reveals the opposite: a deep need to maintain control. The intention of protection. The third intention is protection. When people feel uncertain, threatened, or emotionally exposed, they instinctively begin protecting themselves. This protection can appear in many forms: short answers, closed body posture, limited eye contact, frequent topic changes. Sometimes humor is used as a shield. Other times, people respond with sarcasm or deflection. These reactions are not always signs of dishonesty. Often they are simply signs of emotional caution. The mind is protecting something private, a memory, an insecurity, a fear. When you notice protective behavior, the worst mistake is pushing harder. Pressure often increases resistance. Instead, skilled communicators slow the conversation down. They create comfort. They reduce tension. And when safety appears, the protective barrier often begins to dissolve naturally. This is one of the most powerful secrets of human interaction. People reveal themselves when they feel safe, not when they feel forced. Understanding intention transforms the way you observe the world. You begin to notice power dynamics inside meetings. You recognize insecurity hidden behind arrogance. You detect curiosity behind silence. Suddenly, conversations become clearer. Because human communication is not random. It is a constant negotiation of emotion, attention, and intent. But there is one final skill that separates casual observers from true masters of behavioral reading. It is the ability to manage your own psychological presence. Because when you control the signals you send, you begin to influence the signals you receive. And that is where real power in communication begins. In the next chapter, the final chapter of this introduction, you will discover how to build a presence that naturally attracts attention, respect, and influence. Not through force, not through intimidation, but through something far more powerful: psychological gravity.
Part 6. Psychological gravity. Some people enter a room and immediately attract attention. They do not speak loudly. They do not demand authority. Yet somehow others naturally turn toward them. Conversations slow down. Eyes shift in their direction. And when they speak, people listen. This invisible force is what we can call psychological gravity. Just as gravity pulls objects toward the center of a planet, psychological gravity pulls attention toward a person. It is not magic. It is the result of several subtle signals working together. Signals that communicate stability, confidence, and awareness. The first element of psychological gravity is stillness. Most people move constantly. They adjust their posture. They shift their weight. They touch their face. They look around the room repeatedly. These movements are often unconscious signs of nervous energy. But individuals with strong psychological presence move differently. Their movements are deliberate. They do not rush. They do not fidget. When they listen, they remain still. When they speak, their gestures are purposeful and controlled. Stillness sends a powerful message to the human brain. This person is comfortable in this environment. And comfort often signals confidence. The second element is controlled speech rhythm. Notice how inexperienced speakers rush through their words. They speak quickly. They fill silence with unnecessary phrases. They repeat themselves. This behavior often comes from a fear of losing attention. But people with strong conversational influence do the opposite. They use pauses. They allow silence to exist between ideas. Their sentences arrive with calm clarity rather than urgency. And this slower rhythm has a powerful psychological effect. It encourages others to listen more carefully. Because when speech slows down, attention naturally sharpens. The third element of psychological gravity is focused attention. One of the greatest compliments you can give someone is your full attention. Not partial attention. Not distracted attention. But genuine focus. When someone feels that you are truly present in the conversation, something remarkable happens. Their brain releases small amounts of dopamine, a chemical associated with reward and pleasure. In simple terms, people feel good when someone listens deeply to them, and they begin to associate that positive feeling with the person who created it. This is why great communicators often become memorable figures, not because they speak constantly, but because they listen intensely. The fourth element is emotional stability. Every social environment contains moments of tension, disagreement, awkward silence, unexpected challenges. In these moments, many people react emotionally. They become defensive. They become irritated. They become anxious. But individuals with psychological gravity remain composed. Their tone remains steady. Their posture remains relaxed. Their breathing remains calm. This stability has a contagious effect. Just as panic spreads quickly through a group, calmness can also spread. When one person remains emotionally balanced, others begin to adjust around that balance. The final element is awareness. True masters of human interaction constantly observe their surroundings. They notice shifts in mood. They notice subtle reactions. They notice when someone wishes to speak but hesitates. They read the room. And because they see more than others, they respond with greater precision. A small comment at the right moment. A pause that allows someone else to contribute. A question that redirects attention. These actions create the impression of natural leadership, but in truth, they come from careful observation. Psychological gravity is not about dominating others. It is about becoming a center of stability within social interaction. And stability attracts attention. Just as calm water reflects the world clearly, a calm mind reads people more accurately. By now, you have explored the foundations of behavioral reading. You have learned how to observe body language, how to detect signals of deception, how to guide conversations, how to understand intention, how to develop psychological presence. But this is only the beginning. A level where observation becomes instinct, where conversations reveal hidden patterns, where the silent language of human behavior becomes impossible to ignore.
And that journey begins with a simple habit. Observe more than you speak. Because the world is constantly communicating. Most people are simply too distracted to see it. But now, you are no longer one of them. Part 7. The Architecture of Human Behavior. Every human action begins long before the body moves, before a word is spoken, before a gesture appears, before a decision is made. The brain has already begun its silent work. To truly read people, you must understand a simple truth. Behavior is never random. Every movement, every hesitation, every change in tone comes from an internal process taking place inside the mind. This process follows a hidden structure. Psychologists often describe human behavior as a chain with 3 invisible links: stimulus, emotion, response. First comes the stimulus: a question, a comment, a memory, a sudden realization. Something enters the mind. Then comes the second stage, emotion. The brain instantly evaluates the stimulus. Is it safe? Is it threatening? Is it embarrassing? Is it exciting? This emotional reaction happens extremely fast, often faster than conscious thought. And finally comes the third stage, response. The body reacts. A smile appears. The shoulders tense. The eyes widen. The voice changes. What most people see is only the final stage, the response. But skilled observers learn to detect something deeper. They begin to notice the emotional reaction that happens between stimulus and response. This tiny moment is where truth lives. For example, imagine someone is asked a difficult question. A brief flash of surprise appears in their eyes. Then they smile calmly and answer with confidence. Most people will notice only the smile. But the trained observer notices the micro-reaction that appeared before the smile. That micro-reaction reveals the real emotional response. This is why timing is one of the most important skills in behavioral reading. The order of reactions often tells a story. Genuine emotions appear first. Controlled expressions appear second. In other words, the body reacts honestly before the mind has time to organize a social mask. Another powerful observation skill involves recognizing emotional contradictions. These contradictions appear when 2 signals conflict with each other. For example, a person says they are relaxed, but their hands are tightly clasped. Someone claims they are happy, but their smile disappears instantly when they stop speaking. Someone insists they are confident, but their posture collapses slightly under pressure. These mismatches between words and body language are extremely important, because the body rarely lies as smoothly as the voice. Human beings are excellent at controlling language, but controlling the entire body is far more difficult. The brain must coordinate dozens of muscles, breathing patterns, and emotional signals all at once. Even experienced deceivers struggle to maintain perfect consistency. That is why the most reliable method of reading behavior is not focusing on a single signal. Instead, focus on congruence. When someone's words, tone, posture, and facial expressions all align, the message is likely authentic. But when these signals conflict, something deeper may be happening beneath the surface. Another fascinating concept in behavioral psychology is emotional contagion. Humans unconsciously absorb the emotional states of people around them. If someone enters a room with visible anxiety, others often begin to feel uneasy. If someone speaks with calm confidence, the entire atmosphere can shift. This phenomenon explains why certain individuals naturally influence group dynamics. Their emotional state becomes the emotional center of the environment. And this leads to an important insight. If you wish to influence conversations, do not try to control everyone else. Instead, Learn to control your own emotional signals, because emotions spread quietly through social spaces. Calm spreads. Confidence spreads. Curiosity spreads. And when your emotional presence remains stable, people often begin to align with it. But there is an even deeper layer to human perception that most people never study. It involves something the brain does constantly without your awareness. Something called thin slicing. In the next chapter, you will discover how the human brain forms powerful judgments about people within seconds, sometimes before a single word is spoken. And once you understand this process, you will begin to see why first impressions are rarely accidents.
Part 8. The Power of First Impressions. Before two people exchange their first sentence, something extraordinary has already happened. The human brain has formed a judgment. Not a complete judgment, not a final decision, but a powerful first impression. This process happens incredibly fast. In many cases, the brain forms an impression of another person within a few seconds of seeing them, sometimes even faster. Psychologists call this phenomenon thin slicing. Thin slicing is the brain's ability to take a very small amount of information and create a quick interpretation of someone's character, confidence, and intentions. It is a survival mechanism. For thousands of years, our ancestors had to make rapid decisions about strangers. Friend or threat, safe or dangerous, leader or follower. Waiting too long to decide could mean serious consequences. So the human brain evolved to evaluate people instantly. Even today, this ancient system still operates inside every social interaction. When someone first sees you, their brain quietly begins asking questions. Does this person appear confident? Do they seem trustworthy? Do they belong here? Should I pay attention to them? And the fascinating part is this. These judgments are rarely based on what you say. They are based on how you appear before speaking. Your posture, your facial expression, your movement, your pace, your eye contact. All of these signals form a silent introduction, long before your words arrive. This is why experienced communicators understand something extremely important. Your presence begins speaking before you do. Imagine two individuals entering the same room. The first walks quickly, glancing around nervously, adjusting their clothes repeatedly. The second walks calmly, moves with steady pace, and briefly observes the room before engaging. Both individuals may have the same intelligence, the same ideas, the same intentions. But the first impression they create will be very different. The human brain interprets movement as information. Fast, scattered movement can signal uncertainty. Controlled, deliberate movement can signal confidence. These interpretations often happen automatically. Most people do not consciously analyze them. Their brain simply feels something about the person, and that feeling becomes the foundation of the first impression. Another powerful element of first impressions is facial neutrality. Many people mistakenly believe they must constantly smile when meeting others. But forced smiles often feel unnatural. True confidence usually appears through relaxed facial control, not exaggerated friendliness. A calm, neutral expression often communicates more stability than a constant smile. When a genuine smile appears at the right moment, it feels authentic. Timing matters. The third element of first impressions is eye behavior. Eye contact during first interactions should be brief but confident. Too little eye contact may signal discomfort. Too much eye contact may feel intimidating. The ideal balance is simple. Look directly when greeting someone. Maintain eye contact for a moment. Then allow the gaze to move naturally. This creates a sense of ease.
Another subtle factor is voice entry. The first few words you speak often shape how others perceive your authority. If your voice begins uncertainly, soft, rushed, or hesitant, listeners may subconsciously interpret it as insecurity. But when speech begins with a calm and clear tone, the brain interprets it as confidence. The difference is not volume, it is control. Take a breath. Speak clearly. Allow your words to arrive with calm rhythm. These small adjustments can dramatically change how others experience your presence. But here is the most important truth about first impressions. They are powerful, but they are not permanent. First impressions create the opening frame of an interaction, but consistent behavior can reinforce or transform that frame. Confidence must continue through actions. Respect must appear in listening. Trust must grow through consistency. In other words, the first impression opens the door, but character decides what happens inside the room. In the next chapter, we will explore a powerful psychological ability that great observers develop over time, an ability that allows them to notice patterns in people's behavior almost instantly. It is called behavioral pattern recognition. And once you develop it, human interactions begin to feel less mysterious and far more predictable. Part 9. Behavioral pattern recognition. At the beginning of this journey, reading people may feel difficult. You watch gestures, you observe eye contact, you listen to tone of voice, but everything still seems scattered, like pieces of a puzzle that do not yet form a clear picture. This is completely normal, because the real skill in reading human behavior does not come from memorizing signals. It comes from developing something far more powerful: pattern recognition. Pattern recognition is the brain's ability to detect repeated structures in behavior. At first, the signals appear random, but after enough observation, the mind begins to connect them. Small details start forming larger patterns. And once a pattern becomes clear, understanding people becomes much easier. Think about how experienced doctors diagnose illness. They rarely rely on a single symptom. Instead, they observe clusters of symptoms that appear together. A fever alone does not reveal much, but fever combined with fatigue, coughing, and breathing difficulty forms a pattern. Human behavior works in exactly the same way. A single gesture rarely reveals meaning, but when several behaviors appear together, they begin to tell a story. For example, a person avoids eye contact. Their speech becomes slower. Their hands begin touching their neck repeatedly. Individually, each signal could mean many things. But when these signals appear together, especially during a difficult conversation, they often indicate psychological discomfort. The trained observer sees the pattern immediately. Another example: someone leans forward while speaking. Their voice becomes more energetic. Their eyes remain focused on the listener. This cluster of signals often reveals genuine interest and engagement. The body is moving toward the interaction rather than away from it. But pattern recognition goes deeper than body language. It also applies to behavioral consistency. Every person has natural rhythms in communication: their speaking speed, their gesture style, their level of eye contact, their emotional expression. This natural rhythm is called a behavioral baseline. Before you can interpret changes in behavior, you must first observe the baseline. What is normal for this person? How do they behave when relaxed? How do they respond when comfortable? Once the baseline becomes clear, something interesting happens. Suddenly, changes become visible. A confident speaker becomes unusually quiet. A calm person becomes tense. A relaxed posture becomes rigid. These shifts often indicate that something important is happening internally. Perhaps the topic has become sensitive. Perhaps a memory has been triggered. Perhaps a person feels challenged or uncertain. The key is not jumping to conclusions. The key is noticing the moment behavior changes. This moment is where valuable information appears. Another fascinating aspect of pattern recognition involves predicting reactions. When you observe someone long enough, you begin to recognize how they typically respond to certain situations. Some people become defensive when challenged. Others become quiet. Some respond with humor. Others respond with explanation. These tendencies form predictable behavioral patterns. And once you recognize them, conversations become easier to navigate. You begin to anticipate reactions before they happen. You adjust your approach. You guide the interaction more effectively. This skill is extremely valuable in leadership, negotiation, teaching, and social relationships. Because understanding patterns allows you to understand people. But there is one final element that transforms observation into mastery. It is something every great psychologist, negotiator, and communicator eventually develops. It is called situational awareness. In the next chapter, you will discover how the most skilled observers read not only individuals, but entire environments. They sense shifts in group dynamics. They detect tension before conflict appears. And they recognize who holds influence inside a room. Because sometimes the most important signals are not coming from one person. They are coming from the entire room. Part 10. Situational awareness. Most people focus on the person directly in front of them. They listen to the words being spoken. They watch the gestures of the individual they are talking to. But the most skilled observers understand something deeper. Human interaction does not happen in isolation. Every conversation exists inside a social environment. A room, a group, a meeting, a shared emotional atmosphere. And within that environment, many silent signals are constantly moving between people. This is where the skill of situational awareness becomes powerful. Situational awareness means observing not only one person, but the entire social landscape. It is the ability to sense how individuals influence each other, how attention flows through a group, how power shifts from one voice to another. When you develop this awareness, something fascinating begins to happen. You start noticing things that most people completely miss. You see who people look at before making a decision. You notice who interrupts others and who allows themselves to be interrupted. You observe whose jokes receive laughter and whose comments disappear into silence. These signals reveal invisible structures inside social groups. Structures of influence, structures of authority, structures of comfort and tension. For example, imagine entering a meeting room. Several people are speaking casually. At first glance, it may seem like a normal conversation. But if you observe carefully, patterns begin to appear. Perhaps one person speaks and others immediately stop talking to listen. Perhaps another person speaks but receives little response. Perhaps a third individual rarely speaks at all, yet others glance toward them before expressing opinions. These subtle reactions reveal the hidden hierarchy of the group. Influence is not always loud. Sometimes the most influential person in the room speaks the least. But when they do speak, everyone pays attention. Situational awareness also allows you to detect emotional shifts inside groups. A conversation may begin relaxed. People laugh. Body posture is open. But suddenly a sensitive topic appears. You notice chairs repositioning, arms crossing, voices becoming more controlled, eye contact decreasing. The atmosphere has changed. Most people may not consciously recognize this shift, but skilled observers feel it immediately. Because they are watching the entire environment, not just one speaker. Another important element of situational awareness is attention flow. Attention inside a group behaves almost like energy. It moves from person to person. When someone tells an engaging story, attention moves toward them. When someone interrupts awkwardly, attention may drop. When someone with authority begins speaking, attention may instantly reorganize. Understanding this flow allows you to navigate conversations more intelligently. You learn when to speak. You learn when to remain silent. You learn when a moment is right to introduce an idea. The timing of communication can be just as important as the message itself. Great communicators rarely speak randomly. They observe first. They wait for the moment when attention is ready to receive information. Then they speak. And because their timing is precise, their words carry more weight. Situational awareness also helps you detect hidden tension. In some environments, people may appear polite on the surface. They smile. They agree. They maintain calm conversation. But subtle signals may reveal underlying conflict. Short responses, forced smiles, rigid posture, limited eye contact between specific individuals. These signals often indicate unresolved disagreement beneath the surface. A skilled observer notices these dynamics early, and this awareness allows them to avoid unnecessary conflict or navigate sensitive situations carefully. But perhaps the greatest benefit of situational awareness is this. It transforms you from a participant into an observer of human behavior. You are no longer reacting blindly to conversations. You are understanding the structure behind them. You see how influence moves. You see how emotions spread. You see how people position themselves within social space. And once you begin seeing these patterns, social environments feel far less mysterious. But there is still one final level of mastery beyond observation. A level where understanding human behavior allows you to influence interactions naturally, without force, without manipulation, simply by guiding attention, emotion, and conversation. In the next chapter, you will discover the final skill in this introduction to human behavioral mastery, the art of psychological influence. Because understanding people is powerful, but knowing how to influence human interaction responsibly is where true mastery begins.
Part 11. The Art of Psychological Influence. Understanding people is a powerful skill, but influence is something deeper. Influence is not about forcing others to agree with you. It is not about domination or manipulation. True influence is the ability to shape the direction of interaction so naturally that others feel comfortable following the path. It is subtle, almost invisible, and the most skilled communicators use it every day without appearing controlling. The foundation of psychological influence begins with a simple principle. People trust those who understand them. Before influence can appear, connection must exist. When someone feels understood, their mind becomes more open. Their defenses relax. Their attention becomes focused. This is why great communicators spend more time listening than speaking. Listening is not passive. It is one of the most powerful tools of influence. When someone feels heard, their brain experiences a sense of validation. They feel respected. They feel acknowledged. And when people feel respected, they become far more willing to consider new ideas. Another key principle of influence is framing. The way information is presented can dramatically change how it is received. Imagine two different ways of expressing the same idea. The first says, "This plan may have several risks." The second says, "This plan creates several opportunities." Both statements may describe the same situation.
but the emotional response they create can be completely different. The human brain reacts strongly to emotional framing. Words associated with opportunity often create curiosity and openness. Words associated with danger often create caution and resistance. Skilled communicators understand this psychological effect. They present ideas in ways that encourage constructive thinking, not fear. Another powerful element of influence is confidence through clarity. People naturally trust individuals who express ideas clearly. Uncertain language often weakens influence. For example, compare these two statements. I think this might possibly work. This approach will likely work for 3 important reasons. The second statement feels more stable because it presents structure and reasoning. Confidence is not about sounding arrogant. It is about presenting thoughts with calm clarity. Another technique used by skilled communicators is guided questions. Rather than telling someone what to think, they ask questions that lead the other person to discover the idea themselves. For example, instead of saying, "You should consider changing this strategy," a skilled communicator might ask, "What outcome do you think this strategy will create in the long term?" This question encourages reflection. The other person begins thinking, and often they arrive at the conclusion themselves. Ideas discovered personally often feel stronger than ideas imposed externally. This is one of the most elegant forms of influence. Guidance without pressure. There is also an important emotional component to influence. People rarely change their minds because of logic alone. Emotion plays a powerful role in decision-making. When an idea connects with someone's values, goals, or aspirations, it becomes far more persuasive. This is why stories are often more influential than statistics. Stories activate imagination. They create emotional engagement. They allow people to experience an idea rather than simply analyze it. Great communicators know when to use logic and when to use narrative. But perhaps the most important principle of influence is integrity. Influence used without integrity quickly becomes manipulation. And manipulation eventually destroys trust. True influence builds relationships rather than exploiting them. It creates mutual understanding rather than hidden agendas. Because the most powerful communicators do not seek to control others. They seek to guide conversations toward clarity, cooperation, and shared understanding. When influence is used with awareness and responsibility, it becomes one of the most valuable skills a person can develop. You can resolve conflict more effectively. You can inspire people more naturally. You can guide discussions toward better outcomes. And most importantly, you gain a deeper understanding of human nature. This journey through the silent language of minds has introduced you to the foundations of behavioral observation, emotional awareness, and communication mastery. But the real training begins outside these pages. In everyday conversations, in meetings, in friendships, in moments of disagreement and moments of connection. Every interaction becomes an opportunity to observe, to learn, to understand. Because human behavior is one of the most fascinating subjects in the world. And once you learn to see it clearly, the world of conversation will never look the same again. Part 12. The Psychology of Dominance. In every social interaction, whether people realize it or not, a subtle question is always present. Who leads the psychological space? This does not mean who talks the most. It does not mean who holds the highest position. Dominance in conversation is often much quieter than that. Psychological dominance is about who sets the emotional tone of the interaction. Some people unconsciously allow others to shape the atmosphere around them. Their mood shifts easily depending on the reactions of others. But individuals with strong psychological presence do something different. They anchor the emotional environment. Their calm remains steady even when others become tense. Their focus remains clear even when conversations become chaotic. Because of this stability, people instinctively begin adjusting their behavior around them. This is the foundation of psychological dominance. Not force, not aggression, but emotional stability combined with awareness. One of the first signals of psychological dominance is control of reaction time. Most people react instantly to everything. A challenging question appears, they answer immediately. A disagreement occurs, they defend themselves quickly. An uncomfortable silence appears, they rush to fill it. But highly composed communicators do not react impulsively. They pause. They allow a moment of silence before responding. This brief pause has a powerful psychological effect. It communicates that the person is thinking rather than reacting. And thoughtful responses often appear more authoritative than emotional reactions. Another powerful signal is space ownership. Observe confident individuals in a room. They rarely shrink their physical presence. Their posture remains open. Their shoulders remain relaxed. They do not constantly adjust themselves or appear restless. This physical stability sends a silent message to others. I am comfortable here. And comfort in a social space often translates into perceived authority. Another element of psychological dominance is voice grounding. When someone speaks with a steady and controlled voice, the brain interprets it as confidence. Fast and nervous speech can make even intelligent ideas sound uncertain. But when speech flows slowly and clearly, listeners instinctively pay more attention. This is why experienced leaders often speak at a measured pace. They are not rushing to prove themselves. They allow their words to carry weight. Another subtle signal of influence is interruption management. In many conversations, people interrupt each other. But notice how individuals with strong psychological presence handle interruptions. They do not react aggressively. They do not become defensive. Instead, they calmly continue their thought after the interruption passes. Or they pause briefly, then resume speaking with composure. This behavior quietly communicates confidence. It shows that the person is not easily destabilized by social pressure. And stability naturally attracts respect. There is also an important difference between dominance and intimidation. Intimidation creates tension. People feel uncomfortable and guarded. Dominance, when expressed calmly, creates structure. People feel guided rather than threatened. True psychological strength rarely needs to prove itself loudly. It appears through consistency, through calm reactions, through clarity of communication, and through awareness of the social environment. But perhaps the most powerful form of psychological dominance is self-control. The ability to manage your own emotions during difficult conversations, to remain composed when challenged, to listen without reacting impulsively, to speak without aggression. This level of control is rare, but when people encounter it, they immediately recognize it. Because emotional discipline signals inner strength. And inner strength is one of the most powerful signals a human being can display. As you continue developing your ability to read and guide human interactions, remember one important truth. The goal is not to overpower others. The goal is to understand people deeply enough that influence becomes natural. Because true mastery of human behavior is not about control, it is about awareness. In the next chapter, we will explore one of the most fascinating abilities of expert observers, detecting hidden emotions before they are spoken. Because sometimes the most important things people communicate are the things they never say out loud.
Part 13. Detecting hidden emotions. Not every emotion is spoken. In fact, some of the most powerful emotions people experience are the ones they try hardest to hide.
fear, jealousy, embarrassment, doubt. These emotions often remain unspoken, but the human body still reveals them through small and involuntary signals. Learning to detect these hidden emotions is one of the most advanced skills in behavioral observation. Because emotions always leave traces, sometimes in posture, sometimes in breathing, sometimes in facial expressions so brief that most people never notice them. These brief emotional flashes are known as micro-expressions. A micro-expression is a facial reaction that appears for a fraction of a second before a person consciously controls their expression. It may last only a moment, sometimes less than half a second. Yet within that moment, the true emotional response appears. For example, imagine someone receiving unexpected criticism. For a brief instant, their eyebrows may tighten, their lips may compress, their eyes may widen slightly. But almost immediately, they recover and present a calm expression. Most people will only notice the calm face, but the trained observer sees the first reaction, the genuine one. Because the emotional brain always reacts before the social mask appears. This happens because emotions are processed in deep regions of the brain that respond faster than conscious thought. The body reacts instantly. The mind corrects the reaction a moment later. And in that tiny gap between reaction and correction, the truth briefly appears. But facial expressions are only one part of emotional detection. Another powerful signal is breathing change. Emotions often alter breathing patterns immediately. When people feel anxious, their breathing may become shallow. When they feel angry, breathing may become heavier and more forceful. When someone feels nervous, you may notice small pauses in speech as they unconsciously regulate their breath. These signals are subtle but extremely informative. Another emotional indicator is muscle tension. Hidden emotions often appear in areas of the body that people do not consciously monitor. The neck, the jaw, the hands. For example, someone attempting to remain calm may tighten their jaw slightly. Their fingers may press together. Their shoulders may rise slightly without them noticing. These small muscular tensions reveal internal emotional pressure. Another interesting clue is voice modulation. The human voice carries emotional information even when the words themselves are neutral. A slight crack in the voice, a sudden change in speaking speed, a drop in volume. These changes often appear when emotions rise beneath the surface. Skilled listeners learn to notice not only what is said, but how it is said, because tone often reveals what language tries to hide. There is also an important pattern in emotional behavior called emotional leakage. When people attempt to suppress strong feelings, the emotion sometimes escapes through unexpected channels. For example, someone may smile while speaking politely, but their tone carries irritation. Someone may claim to be relaxed while their hands fidget restlessly. Someone may speak confidently while their voice trembles slightly. These mismatches between emotional signals are often the clearest indicators of hidden feelings. However, detecting hidden emotions requires patience and responsibility. The goal is not to accuse people or confront them immediately. The goal is to understand what may be happening beneath the surface. Sometimes a person is not ready to reveal what they feel. Sometimes they may not even fully understand their own emotions yet. Observation should create empathy, not judgment. Because when you learn to recognize hidden emotions, you also gain something more valuable than influence. You gain insight into the human experience. You begin to see the fears behind confidence, the uncertainty behind arrogance, the curiosity behind silence. And when you see these deeper emotional layers, your understanding of people becomes far richer. But emotional signals are not the only invisible forces guiding human behavior. there is another powerful system constantly shaping how people react, decide, and interact with others. It operates quietly inside the mind, often without conscious awareness. In the next chapter, we will explore this system, the subconscious mind. Because the subconscious mind is responsible for many of the behaviors people believe they are choosing freely. And once you understand how it works, you begin to see why people sometimes act in ways even they cannot fully explain.
Part 14. The hidden power of the subconscious mind. Most people believe they are fully aware of their decisions. They think their choices are logical, deliberate, and conscious. But modern psychology reveals something far more fascinating. A large part of human behavior is guided by a system operating beneath conscious awareness. This system is known as the subconscious mind. The subconscious mind is constantly processing information. It analyzes facial expressions. It senses emotional tones. It evaluates risk and safety. It compares present experiences with past memories. And it does all of this far faster than the conscious mind. While the conscious mind thinks slowly and logically, the subconscious reacts instantly. It forms impressions. It triggers emotions. It guides instinctive responses. In many situations, people act based on subconscious reactions long before they consciously understand why. This is why someone might say, "I don't know why, but something about that person makes me uncomfortable." Often, their subconscious mind has already detected subtle signals, perhaps tension in posture, perhaps inconsistency in tone, perhaps something that reminds them of a past experience. The conscious mind may not yet understand the reason, but the subconscious has already made an evaluation. Another example of subconscious influence appears in habitual behavior. Many actions people perform every day require almost no conscious thought. Driving a familiar route, typing on a keyboard, walking through a familiar building. These behaviors are guided by patterns stored inside the subconscious. Once the brain learns a pattern, it automates the process to conserve mental energy. This is extremely useful. But it also means people often operate on automatic behavioral scripts during social interactions. For example, many individuals automatically smile when greeting others. They repeat familiar phrases. They respond to social cues in predictable ways. These patterns can be observed and understood, and once you recognize them, you begin to see when someone breaks from their normal pattern. A break in the pattern often indicates that something unexpected is happening internally. Perhaps they feel nervous. Perhaps they feel challenged. Perhaps they are thinking more carefully than usual. Another fascinating aspect of the subconscious mind is its relationship with emotional memory. Strong emotional experiences are often stored deeply in the brain. Sometimes a small trigger, a word, a tone of voice, or a specific topic can activate these memories. When this happens, people may react emotionally without fully understanding why. They may suddenly become defensive. They may withdraw from conversation. They may change the topic quickly. To an untrained observer, these reactions may seem confusing. But someone who understands subconscious processes recognizes what may be happening. The mind has encountered a psychological trigger. Another important concept is priming. Priming occurs when exposure to certain ideas or emotions influences how people behave afterward. For example, if a conversation begins with themes of cooperation and trust, people may become more open and collaborative. But if a discussion begins with themes of conflict or competition, people may become more guarded. The subconscious mind absorbs these emotional signals quickly, and they influence behavior throughout the interaction. This is why skilled communicators pay attention to how conversations begin.
the opening tone often shapes everything that follows. But perhaps the most powerful insight about the subconscious mind is this: people are not always fully aware of their own motivations. They may believe they are acting logically, but hidden emotions, past experiences, and subconscious impressions may be guiding their choices. Understanding this creates a deeper level of patience and empathy in human interaction. You begin to realize that behavior is rarely simple. Behind every action lies a network of thoughts, memories, emotions, and subconscious influences. And when you learn to recognize these invisible forces, your understanding of people becomes far more sophisticated. But there is still one more dimension of human behavior that expert observers study carefully. It involves how groups of people influence the behavior of individuals. Because when humans gather together, something remarkable happens. Individual behavior begins to change. People adapt. They conform. They respond to social pressure. In the next chapter, we will explore the fascinating world of group psychology. Because sometimes, the most powerful influence on human behavior is not one person. It is the crowd around them.
Part 15. The psychology of the crowd. Human beings behave differently when they are alone, and they behave very differently when they are part of a group. A single individual may appear calm, thoughtful, and careful with their words, but place that same individual inside a crowd, and something changes. Their decisions may become faster. Their emotions may become stronger. Their behavior may shift in ways they would never display alone. This phenomenon is known as group psychology, and understanding it reveals one of the most powerful forces shaping human behavior. When people enter a group environment, their brains begin adjusting automatically. They observe others. They measure social signals. They unconsciously ask a question that humans have asked for thousands of years. How should I behave in this group? This instinct comes from our evolutionary past. For early humans, survival depended heavily on belonging to a tribe. Isolation could mean danger. Acceptance meant protection. Because of this, the human brain developed strong sensitivity to social approval and rejection. Even today, this instinct remains extremely powerful. People often adjust their behavior to match the group around them. This process is known as social conformity. If everyone in a group laughs at a joke, others often begin laughing as well, even if they did not initially find it funny. If a group expresses strong opinions, individuals may hesitate to disagree openly. The desire to belong can quietly influence how people speak, act, and even think. But conformity is only one part of group psychology. Another powerful force is emotional contagion. Emotions spread quickly within groups. If excitement enters a crowd, it often spreads rapidly. If tension appears, the entire atmosphere can shift within seconds. This happens because humans unconsciously mirror the emotional signals of others. Facial expressions, voice tones, body language. The brain constantly absorbs these signals and adjusts its emotional state accordingly. This is why certain individuals can strongly influence the mood of an entire room. A calm person can reduce tension. An anxious person can increase it. A confident speaker can energize a group. Emotions move through social environments like waves. Another fascinating effect in group behavior is called diffusion of responsibility. When people are alone, they feel fully responsible for their actions. But when many people are present, responsibility becomes psychologically shared. Each person feels slightly less pressure to act. This is why, in some situations, individuals may hesitate to take action when others are present. The brain assumes someone else will respond.
Understanding this effect is important when observing group interactions. Sometimes silence in a group does not mean agreement. It may simply mean everyone is waiting for someone else to speak first. Another important element of group psychology is status perception. Within almost every group, certain individuals are perceived as holding higher influence. Sometimes this influence comes from formal authority: a manager, a leader, an expert. But sometimes influence emerges naturally, through confidence, through experience, through the respect of others. People in groups often look toward these individuals before making decisions. Even small signals, like a nod of agreement or a raised eyebrow, can shape the direction of group discussion. This is why skilled observers pay attention to where people look during conversations. The direction of attention often reveals who holds real influence. Understanding group psychology allows you to see social environments more clearly. You begin to notice how opinions spread, how moods change, how leadership appears, sometimes quietly, sometimes visibly. And most importantly, you recognize that individuals do not always behave the same way inside groups as they do when alone. Because the presence of others changes the psychological landscape. But there is one final concept that ties together everything you have learned in this book. It is the ability to combine observation, emotional awareness, and communication into a single, powerful skill. A skill that transforms everyday conversations into opportunities for understanding. This skill is called human insight. And in the next chapter, the final chapter of this journey, you will discover how to bring all these abilities together into one unified approach to reading people. Because true mastery of human behavior is not about memorizing signals. It is about developing a new way of seeing the world.
Part 16. The Awakening of Human Insight. By now, you have explored many layers of human behavior. You have learned how the eyes reveal hidden reactions, how body language exposes internal emotions, how deception creates subtle pressure within the mind, how conversations can be guided without force, how groups influence individuals, and how the subconscious mind quietly shapes behavior beneath awareness. But all of these skills point towards something larger, something deeper. They lead to the development of human insight. Human insight is not a single technique. It is a way of perceiving the world, a shift in how you observe people, conversations, and social environments. Before learning these ideas, many interactions may have seemed mysterious. Why did someone suddenly become defensive? Why did a conversation change direction unexpectedly? Why did certain people command attention without speaking loudly? Now, those mysteries begin to reveal their structure. You start noticing patterns, small changes in posture, brief shifts in tone, moments of hesitation before answers. Signals that once passed unnoticed now become visible. But the greatest transformation is not simply seeing more signals. It is understanding people with greater depth. Because once you begin reading behavior carefully, you discover something important. Human actions are rarely simple. Behind every reaction lies a network of thoughts, emotions, memories, and motivations. The person who appears confident may be hiding insecurity. The person who seems quiet may simply be observing carefully. The person who appears aggressive may actually be protecting something fragile inside. When you understand these possibilities, your perspective changes. You become less judgmental, more curious, more patient. Observation begins to replace assumption. This mindset is the true beginning of psychological mastery. Not manipulation, not control, but awareness.
the ability to watch human interaction as if you are studying a living system. And like any system, human behavior follows patterns. Emotions influence decisions. Environment influences reactions. Attention influences influence. And awareness influences everything. As your observation skills grow stronger, you will begin to notice something remarkable. Conversations slow down. Not in reality, but in your perception. You start noticing the moment before someone speaks, the subtle shift in posture before disagreement, the brief emotional flash before someone hides their reaction. It feels almost as if you can see between the moments of conversation. And in those small spaces between words, a great deal of truth appears. But there is also an important responsibility that comes with this level of awareness. Understanding people gives you influence. Influence gives you power. And power must always be guided by ethics and respect. The goal of reading people is not to manipulate them. It is to communicate more wisely, to understand others more deeply, to avoid unnecessary conflict, to create stronger connections, and to navigate complex social environments with intelligence and empathy. True mastery of human behavior is not about controlling others. It is about mastering yourself, your reactions, your emotions, your awareness. Because the more stable and attentive you become, the more clearly you will see the behavior of others. And once you reach that level of clarity, something extraordinary happens. You begin to understand that every conversation is more than just an exchange of words. It is an interaction between minds, between emotions, between intentions. A silent dance of signals and meaning. And the more you observe this dance, the more fascinating the human world becomes. Because the silent language of minds is always speaking. In every room, in every conversation, in every moment of human connection. Most people simply never learn how to listen. But now, you do. Part 17. The Hidden Signals of Power. Power in human interaction rarely announces itself loudly. In movies, power is often portrayed through shouting, commands, and dramatic authority. But in real life, psychological power looks very different. In fact, the most influential individuals often appear calm, quiet, and observant. They do not rush to speak. They do not fight for attention. Yet somehow, attention naturally moves toward them. Why? Because power in social environments is often communicated through signals, not declarations. These signals are subtle, but the human brain detects them instinctively. One of the strongest signals of power is comfort with silence. Most people are afraid of silence in conversation. When a pause appears, they immediately try to fill it. They explain more. They repeat themselves. They add unnecessary words. But powerful communicators do something different. They allow silence to exist. They pause after making a statement. They give their words space. This creates a psychological effect. When someone speaks and then remains silent, listeners naturally begin thinking about what was said. Silence turns words into weight. Another powerful signal is emotional non-reactivity. Many people react quickly to emotional triggers. A criticism appears, they defend themselves. A disagreement appears, they argue immediately. But individuals with strong psychological control respond differently. They observe first. They listen carefully. They respond calmly rather than react emotionally. This creates a powerful impression. Because when someone remains composed during emotional tension, others often begin adjusting their behavior around them. Calm becomes the center of the interaction. Another signal of psychological power is measured movement. Watch individuals who hold influence in a room. Their movements are rarely rushed. They walk steadily. They gesture deliberately. They avoid restless habits like constant fidgeting or nervous adjustments. This controlled movement communicates confidence to the subconscious minds of observers. The brain interprets physical control as a sign of internal stability. Another fascinating signal involves eye behavior. Powerful communicators maintain balanced eye contact. Not aggressive staring, not avoidance, but steady engagement. When they speak, they look directly at the person they address. When they listen, they remain attentive. This behavior signals presence and awareness, and presence attracts respect. Another subtle but important signal is verbal precision. Many people weaken their communication by adding unnecessary uncertainty. They say things like, "Maybe this could possibly work. I'm not completely sure, but perhaps." While uncertainty can sometimes be appropriate, excessive hesitation often weakens perceived confidence. Powerful communicators speak with clarity. They organize their thoughts. They express ideas in structured and simple language. This does not mean they are always correct. It simply means they communicate with certainty in their reasoning. Another signal of influence is attention control. People with strong psychological presence do not chase attention. Instead, they guide it. They ask thoughtful questions. They introduce ideas at the right moment. They observe the flow of conversation and speak when the group is ready to listen. Because of this timing, their words often carry greater impact. But perhaps the most powerful signal of all is self-mastery. When someone controls their emotions, their reactions, and their communication, they create an internal stability that others can feel. This stability becomes magnetic. People trust it. People respect it. People follow it. True psychological power does not come from dominating others. It comes from mastering yourself so completely that your presence naturally shapes the environment around you. And once you understand these signals, something interesting happens. You begin noticing them everywhere. In leaders, in negotiators, in teachers, in individuals who command quiet respect within their communities. You start seeing that influence is not random. It follows patterns. Patterns of awareness, patterns of emotional control, patterns of communication. But there is an even deeper layer of mastery waiting beyond these observations. It involves understanding how people make decisions. Because every conversation, every negotiation, every interaction eventually leads to a moment where someone chooses. They accept. They reject. They agree. They hesitate. And understanding the psychology behind those decisions reveals one of the most powerful insights of all. In the next chapter, we will explore the psychology of human decision-making. Because if you understand how the mind decides, you begin to understand how influence truly works.
Part 18. The Psychology of Decision-Making. Every day, human beings make thousands of decisions. Some are small and almost invisible. What to say next in a conversation? Where to look while listening? Whether to agree or remain silent? Others are larger and more deliberate. Whom to trust? Which opportunity to accept? Which idea to follow? But despite how complex these choices may appear, the human mind often follows a surprisingly simple rule. Emotion decides first. Logic explains later. This idea may sound surprising, but it is supported by decades of psychological research. Most people believe they make decisions through pure logic. In reality, emotions often guide the direction of the decision long before logic begins its explanation. For example, imagine someone hearing two proposals. Both may contain strong arguments, but if one proposal feels safer or more exciting or more familiar, the mind will naturally lean in that direction.
Only afterward does the conscious mind begin constructing logical reasons to support the choice. This does not mean humans are irrational. It simply means that emotions play a much larger role in decision-making than most people realize. Understanding this principle changes the way you view conversations. Because influence is rarely about presenting the most facts. It is about shaping the emotional experience surrounding those facts. Another important factor in decision-making is cognitive simplicity. The human brain prefers ideas that are easy to understand. When a concept is complex or confusing, the brain becomes cautious. But when an idea is presented clearly and simply, it feels easier to accept. This is why skilled communicators often simplify their messages. They break complex ideas into clear steps. They use examples and stories. They remove unnecessary complexity, because when the mind understands something quickly, it becomes more comfortable with the idea. Another powerful influence on decisions is social proof. Humans are highly sensitive to the behavior of others. If many people appear to support an idea, the brain interprets that as a signal of safety. After all, if others have already accepted something, it may be less risky. This instinct evolved during early human societies. Following the behavior of the group often increased chances of survival. Even today, this instinct still influences decisions. People often look for signals such as what others think, what others approve, what others recommend. These signals shape perception. Another interesting force in decision-making is loss aversion. Psychological studies consistently show that people fear losing something more strongly than they desire gaining something new. In simple terms, the pain of losing is often stronger than the pleasure of gaining. Because of this, decisions often become cautious when potential losses appear. People become careful. They hesitate. They analyze risks more seriously. Understanding this principle helps explain why some individuals resist change, even when the new opportunity may be beneficial. The mind is protecting what it already has. Another factor shaping decisions is confidence perception. People tend to trust individuals who appear confident in their ideas. This does not mean confidence guarantees correctness. But the human brain often interprets calm certainty as a signal of knowledge and experience. When someone explains an idea with clarity and composure, listeners often feel more comfortable accepting it. Confidence acts like a stabilizing signal. But perhaps the most important factor in human decision-making is trust. Without trust, influence collapses. Facts lose power. Arguments lose strength. People become defensive. But when trust exists, communication becomes far easier. Ideas are considered more openly. Conversations become cooperative rather than competitive. This is why the most effective communicators focus first on building credibility and understanding. They listen. They respect different perspectives. They communicate with honesty. Because influence that grows from trust is far stronger than influence based on pressure. Understanding how the human mind makes decisions allows you to see conversations in a completely new way. You begin noticing emotional signals behind agreement and hesitation. You begin understanding why certain ideas spread quickly while others face resistance. You see the invisible forces guiding human choices. And once you see those forces clearly, you gain the ability to communicate with far greater intelligence and awareness. But there is still one final dimension of human behavior that brings everything together. A dimension that connects perception, emotion, influence, and awareness. It is called psychological intelligence. And in the next chapter, we will explore how developing this intelligence transforms the way you understand people, relationships, and the complex world of human interaction. Part 19. Psychological Intelligence. There is a form of intelligence that cannot be measured by traditional tests. It does not appear in academic grades. It cannot be calculated by numbers alone. Yet it shapes the quality of nearly every human interaction. This form of intelligence is known as psychological intelligence. Psychological intelligence is the ability to understand human behavior at a deeper level. It combines observation, emotional awareness, communication skills, and social perception into a single, powerful capability. People with strong psychological intelligence often appear naturally skilled in social environments. They sense tension in a room before conflict begins. They notice when someone feels uncomfortable, even if no one has spoken about it. They know when to speak and when silence is more powerful. But psychological intelligence is not a mysterious talent that only a few people possess. It is a skill that develops through attention and experience. The first element of psychological intelligence is self-awareness. Before you can truly understand others, you must understand your own reactions, your emotions, your habits, your communication style. Many misunderstandings occur because people react automatically without recognizing their own emotional triggers. When you become aware of your reactions, something important happens. You gain the ability to choose your response instead of reacting impulsively. And this creates stability in conversation. The second element is emotional awareness of others. This is often called empathy. But empathy is more than simply feeling sympathy for someone. It is the ability to sense what another person might be experiencing emotionally, even when they have not explained it directly. A skilled observer notices subtle signs, a hesitation before answering, a change in posture, a brief shift in tone. These signals provide clues about emotional states. Understanding these signals allows you to respond with greater sensitivity. And when people feel emotionally understood, communication becomes easier. The third element of psychological intelligence is adaptability. Every social environment is different. A conversation with a close friend is not the same as a negotiation. A professional meeting is not the same as a casual discussion. People with strong psychological intelligence adjust their communication style to fit the environment. They speak differently depending on the situation. They observe the atmosphere before introducing strong opinions. They adapt their tone, pace, and language. This flexibility makes interactions smoother and more effective. Another important element is social perception. This is the ability to see the invisible structure within social groups. Who influences the conversation? Who feels uncertain? Who is trying to guide the direction of discussion? When you develop social perception, you begin to see relationships and dynamics that others may overlook. You understand how influence flows through the group. You recognize where tension exists, and this awareness allows you to navigate social environments with greater confidence. But perhaps the most important element of psychological intelligence is intentional communication. Many people speak without thinking carefully about the effect of their words. They react emotionally. They interrupt. They express ideas without clarity. Intentional communication is different. It involves choosing words carefully, listening before responding, speaking with clarity and purpose. When communication becomes intentional, conversations become more productive. Misunderstandings decrease, respect increases, and influence grows naturally. Psychological intelligence is not about controlling people. It is about understanding them. It is about recognizing the complexity of human emotions, motivations, and experiences. When you develop this intelligence, something remarkable happens. You become more patient with others. You become less reactive during conflict. You become more thoughtful in conversation. and the world of human interaction becomes far less confusing. Because instead of reacting blindly to behavior, you begin to see the structure behind it. You understand that every action has context. Every emotion has a cause. Every conversation contains hidden layers. And once you begin to see these layers clearly, you gain something more valuable than influence. You gain wisdom about human nature. In the next chapter, we will explore the final stage of mastery in reading people. A stage where observation, emotional awareness, and communication unite into a powerful mindset. A mindset that allows you to move through social environments with clarity, confidence, and insight. This stage is known as the observer's mindset. Part 20. The observer's mindset. There is a moment in learning when knowledge stops being information and becomes perception. At the beginning of this journey, you learned techniques. You learned how to observe eye movement, how to recognize emotional signals, how to detect subtle changes in behavior, how conversations can be guided and influenced. But true mastery is not about remembering techniques. True mastery begins when observation becomes natural, when the mind quietly watches human behavior without effort. This way of thinking is called the observer's mindset. The observer's mindset transforms the way you experience the world. Instead of reacting immediately to every situation, you pause internally. You watch. You listen. You analyze. You notice patterns. This small shift changes everything. Most people move through conversations automatically. They react emotionally. They interrupt. They assume. They judge quickly. But the observer does something different. The observer collects information before forming conclusions. They notice tone. They notice timing. They notice inconsistencies between words and behavior. And because of this, their understanding becomes deeper and more accurate. The observer's mindset also creates emotional distance. This does not mean becoming cold or disconnected. It means maintaining a calm mental space even when emotions rise around you. Imagine a conversation where tension suddenly appears. Voices become sharper. Opinions clash. Many people immediately become part of the emotional storm. They defend themselves. They react impulsively. They escalate the conflict. But the observer remains aware. They see the emotional wave rising. And instead of being pulled into it, they step back mentally. They choose their response carefully. This calm awareness creates a powerful advantage, because the person who controls their own reactions often influences the entire emotional direction of the conversation. Another important aspect of the observer's mindset is curiosity. Instead of assuming why people behave in certain ways, the observer becomes curious. Why did that person hesitate before answering? Why did the atmosphere in the room suddenly change? Why did someone shift their posture when a certain topic appeared? Curiosity leads to deeper understanding. Assumption leads to misunderstanding. The observer chooses curiosity. The observer's mindset also encourages continuous learning. Human behavior is endlessly complex. Every culture, environment, and personality adds new layers to social interaction. Even the most experienced psychologists continue learning from everyday conversations, because every interaction offers new insights. Another benefit of this mindset is clarity in communication. When you observe carefully, you begin to notice how different communication styles affect others. You see which words create connection, which words create resistance, which questions encourage openness, which statements create tension. With this awareness, your own communication becomes more precise and thoughtful. But perhaps the most powerful effect of the observer's mindset is inner stability.
When you understand human behavior deeply, fewer things surprise you. You expect emotional reactions. You understand defensive behavior. You recognize social dynamics. And because of this understanding, you become less reactive and more composed. This calm awareness becomes a form of quiet strength. People sense it. They trust it. They respect it. The observer's mindset does not separate you from human interaction. It allows you to participate more intelligently. You become both participant and observer, engaged in conversation, yet aware of the deeper patterns unfolding around you. And when this awareness becomes part of your everyday thinking, something remarkable happens. You begin to move through the social world with clarity. You see hidden tensions before conflict appears. You understand emotions before they are spoken. You guide conversations more naturally. And the silent language of human behavior becomes visible everywhere. But even with all these insights, there remains one final truth about understanding people. A truth that every great psychologist eventually discovers. Human behavior can be studied, observed, and understood. But it can never be completely predicted. Because every human being carries a unique story, a unique mind, a unique emotional world. And that mystery is what makes the study of human behavior endlessly fascinating. This journey into the silent language of minds may end here. But your real journey as an observer of human nature is only beginning.
Part 21. The invisible battles between minds.
Every conversation contains two layers. The first layer is visible. Words, sentences, ideas exchanged between people. But beneath that visible layer, another interaction is taking place. A silent interaction, an invisible negotiation between minds. In this hidden space, people are constantly evaluating each other. Who holds confidence? Who feels uncertain? Who is guiding the conversation? Who is reacting? Most people never notice this hidden level of interaction. They focus only on what is being said. But experienced observers understand that conversations are not simply exchanges of information. They are psychological arenas, spaces where attention, influence, and emotion quietly interact. Imagine two people discussing an idea. One speaks quickly, trying to convince the other. The second listens calmly, observing without rushing. Even if the first person speaks more, the psychological balance of the conversation may belong to the second. Why? Because control of emotional stability often creates control of the interaction. The person who remains calm during pressure usually shapes the rhythm of the conversation. This leads to one of the most important principles of human interaction. The person who controls their reactions controls the psychological space. When you react impulsively, others can predict your behavior. But when you respond thoughtfully, you introduce uncertainty into the interaction. And uncertainty often shifts the balance of influence. Another invisible element inside conversations is attention control. Attention is one of the most valuable resources in human interaction. Where attention goes, influence often follows. When a person speaks with clarity and calm confidence, attention naturally moves toward them. But when someone speaks nervously, hesitates constantly, or loses focus, attention drifts away. This is why skilled communicators pay close attention to the flow of attention within conversations. They know when listeners are engaged. They know when attention begins to fade. And they adjust their communication accordingly. Another hidden battle inside conversations involves emotional pressure. When people feel emotionally challenged, their reactions reveal a great deal about them. Some individuals become defensive. Some become silent. Some attempt to dominate the discussion. Others try to escape the situation by changing the topic. These reactions are not random. They reveal how each individual manages psychological pressure.
The observer notices these responses carefully, because pressure reveals character. Another fascinating element of these invisible battles is status negotiation. Humans constantly exchange subtle signals that communicate status within social interactions. Posture, eye contact, speaking rhythm, interruptions, confidence of tone. These signals influence how others perceive authority and credibility. But the most effective communicators rarely attempt to dominate status aggressively. Instead, they display calm certainty. They express ideas clearly. They listen attentively. And because of this balanced behavior, others naturally begin treating them with respect. True influence rarely requires force. It grows quietly from stability, clarity, and awareness. Another hidden factor inside conversations is psychological mirroring. Humans unconsciously mirror the behavior of people they feel connected to. Speech patterns, gestures, posture. When two individuals feel comfortable with each other, their movements often begin to synchronize naturally. This mirroring creates a feeling of connection. Skilled communicators sometimes encourage this effect subtly, not by copying others mechanically, but by matching the emotional rhythm of the conversation. When emotional rhythms align, communication becomes smoother. Trust grows more easily. But perhaps the most important insight about these invisible psychological battles is this. Most of them are not conflicts. They are simply processes of understanding. People are trying to understand each other, trying to determine safety, trust, credibility, and intention. Once you understand this process, conversations begin to feel very different. You no longer see them as arguments or competitions. You see them as dynamic systems of signals and perception. And when you observe those signals carefully, you gain the ability to guide interactions more intelligently. Not through manipulation, but through awareness. Because the deepest mastery of human interaction comes from one simple principle. Understand the mind in front of you. And when you truly understand the mind of another person, communication becomes far more powerful than words alone.
Part 22. Reading People in Seconds. The human brain is extraordinary. Within just a few seconds of meeting someone, it begins forming impressions, predictions, and emotional responses. Most people believe that reading others requires long conversations and deep observation. But the truth is far more fascinating. A trained observer can often detect powerful clues within the first few seconds of interaction. Not because they possess supernatural abilities, but because they understand which signals the human brain reveals automatically. When two people meet for the first time, the mind immediately scans several key indicators: posture, movement, eye contact, voice tone, and the speed of reaction. These signals combine to create what psychologists often call a behavioral snapshot, a snapshot of someone's internal state at that moment. One of the first signals to observe is movement speed. People who feel confident in an environment tend to move calmly and steadily. Their gestures appear deliberate rather than rushed. But individuals who feel uncertain often move quickly. They adjust their clothing. They look around repeatedly. Their movements appear less controlled. The brain reveals its emotional state through the rhythm of the body. Another powerful signal appears in eye behavior during the first seconds of interaction. Confident individuals usually establish eye contact briefly but comfortably. Not a long stare, not avoidance, just a calm acknowledgement. But someone who feels uneasy may avoid eye contact entirely, or overcompensate by staring too intensely. Both extremes can reveal internal discomfort. Another fascinating signal appears in reaction timing. When a greeting occurs,
the brain responds almost instantly. A genuine smile appears immediately. A natural handshake feels relaxed. But when reactions are delayed by even a small fraction of time, it may suggest the person is consciously managing their behavior. This delay can indicate nervousness, caution, or uncertainty. The next signal involves vocal entry. The first few words someone speaks often reveal their emotional state. Do they begin speaking clearly, or do they hesitate? Is their voice steady, or does it fluctuate slightly? Confidence in speech usually appears through clarity and rhythm, not through volume. Another signal worth observing is space comfort. How comfortable someone feels within the physical space around them. People who feel confident rarely shrink their posture. They stand or sit naturally. Their shoulders remain relaxed. But individuals who feel uncertain may compress their posture slightly. They may cross their arms or lean away unconsciously. These small adjustments reveal the mind's sense of safety. Another important clue appears in facial muscle tension. The human face contains dozens of small muscles, many of which react automatically to emotional states. A relaxed face usually signals comfort, but tension in the jaw, lips, or forehead may reveal hidden pressure or stress. The observer does not judge these signals immediately. Instead, they collect them like pieces of information. Because the goal of reading people quickly is not to label them instantly. It is to form initial hypotheses about their emotional state. As the conversation continues, those hypotheses can be tested through further observation. But perhaps the most important skill in reading people quickly is attention. Most individuals enter conversations focused on themselves, what they will say, how they appear, how they will respond. But the observer focuses outward. They watch carefully. They listen deeply. They notice patterns others ignore. And because of this, they often understand the emotional landscape of a conversation long before others realize it exists. Reading people in seconds is not about judging others. It is about becoming aware of the signals the human mind reveals automatically. Once you begin seeing these signals, you will notice them everywhere. In meetings, in interviews, in casual conversations, in moments of tension. And the more you observe, the clearer human behavior becomes. But there is another side of human psychology that every serious observer must understand. Because not everyone communicates with honest intentions. Some individuals intentionally manipulate emotions, trust, and perception. In the next chapter, we will explore the psychology of these individuals, how they operate, how they influence others, and how a trained observer can recognize the warning signs early. Because understanding manipulators is essential for protecting your own psychological space. Part 23. The Psychology of Manipulators. Not every conversation is honest. Most human interactions are built on cooperation, curiosity, and mutual understanding. But sometimes, hidden within ordinary communication, there are individuals who use psychology differently. They do not seek understanding. They seek control. These individuals are often known as manipulators. A manipulator does not always appear aggressive or obvious. In fact, the most effective manipulators rarely look dangerous at all. They may appear charming, friendly, even trustworthy. Because manipulation often works best when the target does not realize it is happening. At its core, manipulation is the attempt to influence someone's thoughts, emotions, or decisions without their full awareness. Instead of open persuasion, the manipulator quietly pushes the conversation in a direction that benefits them. To recognize manipulation, the observer must first understand the psychological tools manipulators often use. One common tool is emotional pressure. A manipulator may create a sense of guilt, obligation, or urgency. They might say things like, "If you really cared about this, you would agree," or "Everyone else has already accepted this idea." These statements are not logical arguments. They are emotional triggers designed to reduce resistance. Another manipulation technique is confusion. Some manipulators deliberately complicate conversations. They change topics rapidly. They introduce unnecessary details. They mix truth with misleading information. The goal is simple. When people feel confused, their ability to evaluate information clearly becomes weaker. And when clarity disappears, influence becomes easier. Another strategy is false authority. A manipulator may present themselves as more knowledgeable or experienced than they actually are. They may reference vague sources. They may exaggerate achievements. They may speak with exaggerated certainty. The intention is to create the impression that their opinions should not be questioned. But true expertise rarely needs to be loudly announced. It usually appears through calm explanation and clear reasoning. Another powerful manipulation tactic is gaslighting. Gaslighting occurs when someone intentionally causes another person to doubt their own perception of reality. For example, if a person confronts a manipulator about something they said, the manipulator may respond with statements such as, "That never happened. You're imagining things. You're being too sensitive." Over time, repeated denial can cause someone to question their own memory or judgment. Gaslighting is one of the most psychologically harmful forms of manipulation, because it attacks a person's confidence in their own perception. Another common technique is selective kindness. Manipulators sometimes alternate between friendliness and criticism. At one moment, they may appear supportive and generous. At another moment, they may withdraw approval or express disappointment. This emotional inconsistency creates psychological tension. The target begins seeking approval again, and the manipulator gains influence through emotional control. However, recognizing manipulation does not mean reacting with hostility. The most effective response to manipulation is calm awareness. When you recognize these tactics, you do not need to argue aggressively. Instead, you maintain clarity. You ask precise questions. You slow the conversation down. Manipulation often depends on speed and emotional pressure. Calm questioning disrupts that pressure. Another important protection is confidence in your own perception. Manipulation often works when people doubt themselves. But when you remain grounded in your observations, manipulation becomes far less effective. The goal is not to become suspicious of everyone. Most people are not manipulators. But understanding manipulation helps you protect your psychological space when necessary. It allows you to recognize unhealthy patterns early. It allows you to maintain emotional balance during difficult conversations. And most importantly, it strengthens your ability to communicate with integrity. Because once you understand how manipulation works, you also understand why honest influence is far more powerful. Trust builds lasting influence. Manipulation destroys it. But deception does not always appear through manipulation alone. Sometimes people simply hide the truth. They conceal information. They protect themselves with carefully constructed words. And the human body often reveals these hidden intentions through subtle signals. In the next chapter, we will explore the dark signals of deception, the small behavioral leaks that appear when someone attempts to hide the truth.
Part 24.
The dark signals of deception. Deception is as old as human communication. From small, everyday excuses to carefully constructed lies, people sometimes hide the truth for many different reasons. Fear, embarrassment, protection, or sometimes personal gain. But despite how carefully someone may try to conceal the truth, the human mind and body often struggle to maintain perfect control. Because deception places a unique burden on the brain. To lie successfully, the mind must perform several difficult tasks at once. It must hide the truth. It must create an alternative version of reality. It must remember that false version consistently, and it must monitor the reactions of the listener. This mental workload creates pressure, and pressure often produces behavioral leakage. These leaks are small signals that appear when the brain struggles to maintain the deception. One of the most common signals of deception is inconsistency in timing. When someone tells the truth, their response usually flows naturally from memory. But when someone constructs a lie, their brain must first invent the answer. This can produce subtle delays, a pause that appears slightly longer than expected, a hesitation before responding, a brief moment where the eyes shift away as the mind searches for the story it must create. These pauses alone do not prove deception, but when they appear consistently during specific questions, they become meaningful. Another signal appears in verbal overcompensation. Sometimes when people lie, they attempt to make their story appear more convincing by adding excessive detail. They may provide long explanations for simple questions. They may include unnecessary information that was never requested. This behavior often reflects an unconscious attempt to make the story appear more believable. Ironically, the extra details sometimes make the explanation feel less natural. Another behavioral signal involves face-touching gestures. When the brain experiences stress, the body sometimes attempts to calm itself through small, self-soothing actions. Touching the face, rubbing the neck, adjusting clothing repeatedly. These gestures are not exclusive to lying. Stress can appear in many situations. But when these gestures appear repeatedly during specific topics, they may indicate psychological discomfort. Another revealing signal is voice variation. The human voice often changes under emotional pressure. Someone attempting to hide the truth may experience small fluctuations in tone. The voice may become slightly higher. Speech rhythm may change. Words may become less fluid. These vocal changes occur because emotional stress influences the muscles involved in speech. Another fascinating indicator of deception is micro-expressions. These are brief facial expressions that appear before a person has time to consciously control them. For example, a flash of fear, a moment of anger, a brief look of surprise. These expressions may appear for only a fraction of a second, but they reveal the genuine emotional reaction before the social mask returns. Another important clue in detecting deception is story consistency. When people tell the truth, the structure of their story usually remains stable. The details remain consistent over time. But fabricated stories can change slightly with repetition. Small details shift. Certain parts of the story become unclear. Because maintaining a false narrative requires constant mental effort, and the human brain does not always maintain that effort perfectly. However, the most important rule in detecting deception is this: never rely on a single signal. Human behavior is complex. People may hesitate for many reasons. They may feel nervous even when telling the truth. They may touch their face simply out of habit. True behavioral analysis depends on patterns, not isolated signals. When multiple signals appear together, hesitation, tension, inconsistency, emotional leakage, the observer begins to see a clearer picture. But the goal of detecting deception is not to accuse people or confront them aggressively. The goal is awareness. Understanding the possibility that the full truth may not yet be visible. And sometimes, the most effective response is simply patience. Allowing the conversation to continue. Asking calm and precise questions. Giving the mind time to reveal more information. Because when people attempt to maintain deception for long periods, the mental pressure often increases. And with pressure, the signals become harder to hide. But deception is only one side of human influence. On the other side lies something far more powerful: the ability to guide conversations ethically and effectively, to inspire trust, to shape ideas, to communicate with clarity and impact. In the next chapter, we will explore one of the most advanced skills in human interaction: mastering human influence. Because influence, when used responsibly, is one of the most valuable abilities a person can develop. Part 25. Mastering human influence. Influence is one of the most misunderstood forces in human interaction. Many people believe influence means controlling others, convincing them, winning arguments, dominating conversations. But true influence works very differently. Real influence rarely feels like pressure. It feels like clarity. It feels like understanding. It feels like alignment between minds. The most influential individuals do not force ideas into conversations. Instead, they create conditions where ideas become easier to accept. This begins with the first principle of influence: understanding before persuasion. Most people attempt to influence others too quickly. They present arguments. They defend their ideas. They try to prove they are correct. But when someone feels misunderstood, their mind becomes defensive. Defensiveness closes the door to influence. That is why skilled communicators listen carefully before presenting their ideas. They ask questions. They explore the other person's perspective. They understand motivations, concerns, and emotional reactions. Once a person feels understood, something important happens. Their psychological defenses relax. And when defenses relax, influence becomes possible. The second principle of influence is clarity of message. The human brain prefers simple and structured ideas. When a message is complicated or confusing, the brain becomes cautious. But when an idea is presented clearly and logically, it feels easier to accept. Skilled communicators organize their thoughts carefully. They present ideas step by step. They remove unnecessary complexity. Clarity builds credibility, and credibility strengthens influence. The third principle is emotional alignment. People rarely make decisions based on logic alone. Emotion plays a powerful role in shaping judgment. If an idea resonates with someone's values, goals, or fears, it becomes far more persuasive. For example, two people may present the same proposal. One focuses only on facts and numbers. The other connects the idea to shared goals, hopes, or concerns. The second message often carries more influence, because it connects with the emotional world of the listener. Another important element of influence is trust. Without trust, even the strongest arguments lose their power. But when trust exists, even simple ideas can have a strong impact. Trust is built through consistency, through honesty, through respectful communication. People trust individuals who listen, who acknowledge different perspectives, and who communicate without hidden agendas. Trust transforms conversations from confrontations into collaborations. Another powerful influence technique is guided discovery. Instead of telling someone what to think, skilled communicators ask questions that encourage reflection. For example, instead of saying, "This strategy is wrong," they might ask, "What do you think the long-term outcome of this strategy might be?" This question invites the other person to analyze the idea themselves. When people reach conclusions through their own thinking, they often feel more confident about those conclusions. Ideas discovered personally feel stronger than ideas imposed externally. There is also a subtle psychological principle known as reciprocity. When someone offers help, understanding, or respect, others often feel an unconscious desire to return that positive behavior. Kindness encourages kindness. Respect encourages respect. This principle has influenced human cooperation for thousands of years. Another important aspect of influence is patience. Some ideas require time to be accepted. Pressuring someone to decide quickly can create resistance. But when conversations remain calm and thoughtful, people often reconsider their perspectives naturally. Influence is often a process rather than a single moment. But the most important principle of all is integrity. Influence without integrity becomes manipulation. And manipulation eventually destroys trust. True influence respects the freedom of others to think, question, and decide. It does not force agreement. It invites understanding. The most powerful communicators do not simply try to win arguments. They seek better outcomes, better solutions, better cooperation. And when influence is used responsibly, it becomes a tool for building stronger relationships and more thoughtful conversations. But after exploring influence, observation, deception, and psychology, one final idea remains. An idea that brings everything together. It is the philosophical foundation behind the study of human behavior. In the final chapter of this book, we will explore the deeper philosophy of understanding people. Because learning to read human behavior is not only a practical skill, it is also a way of seeing the world with greater wisdom.
Part 26. The final philosophy of human behavior. At the beginning of this journey, you started with a simple question. Can human behavior truly be understood? You explored body language. You studied emotional signals. You learned about deception, influence, and the silent messages hidden inside everyday conversations. But after studying these ideas, something deeper begins to appear. A realization. Human behavior is both predictable and mysterious at the same time. Patterns exist. Emotions follow recognizable structures. Reactions often follow psychological principles. And yet, every individual carries a unique inner world. A world shaped by memories, experiences, fears, hopes, and beliefs. No two minds are identical. This is what makes the study of human behavior endlessly fascinating. Observation can reveal patterns, but it can never fully capture the complexity of the human mind. This understanding leads to an important shift in perspective. Reading people is not about judging them. It is about understanding the forces that shape their behavior. When you observe someone reacting defensively, you begin asking deeper questions. What fear might exist behind that reaction? What past experience may have shaped their response? What emotional pressure might they be experiencing in that moment? Instead of reacting with frustration, the observer develops curiosity, and curiosity leads to wisdom. Another important lesson from studying human behavior is the value of humility. The more you learn about the mind, the more you realize how complex it truly is. People are not simple machines following predictable instructions. They are living systems shaped by countless influences. This understanding encourages patience. Patience during disagreements.
patience during misunderstandings, patience when others behave in ways that seem irrational at first glance. Because behind every action lies a story, and many of those stories remain invisible. Another philosophical insight emerges when you observe people carefully over time. Human beings are constantly seeking meaning. They seek purpose in their work, connection in their relationships, recognition in their achievements, security in their environment. Understanding this search for meaning helps explain many human behaviors. Why people defend their beliefs so strongly, why they seek approval from others, why they resist ideas that challenge their identity. Behavior is not only about logic, it is also about protecting the internal sense of who we are. But perhaps the most powerful lesson from studying human behavior is this: understanding others begins with understanding yourself. Your reactions, your emotions, your assumptions, your communication style. When you develop awareness of your own mind, you gain the ability to observe others more clearly. Self-awareness becomes the foundation of social intelligence. It allows you to remain calm during tension. It allows you to listen without immediate judgment. It allows you to respond thoughtfully rather than react impulsively. And when self-awareness combines with observation, something extraordinary happens. You begin to see human interaction with remarkable clarity. You notice emotional shifts. You recognize social dynamics. You understand conversations beyond the words being spoken. This awareness transforms everyday interactions into opportunities for learning. Every conversation becomes a window into the human mind. Every disagreement becomes a lesson in psychology. Every moment of connection becomes a reminder of the complexity and beauty of human communication. But even with all this knowledge, one truth remains. The human mind will always retain an element of mystery. And perhaps that mystery is what makes human interaction so fascinating. Because the study of human behavior is not a journey with a final destination. It is a lifelong exploration, an endless process of observation, learning, and understanding. The silent language of minds surrounds us every day, in every room, in every conversation, in every moment of human connection. Most people never notice it, but once you learn to see it, you realize that human communication is far more than words. It is a dance of emotion, a negotiation of perception, a silent exchange between minds. And those who learn to observe that exchange carefully gain something truly powerful. Not control over others, but a deeper understanding of humanity itself.